audience. So our topic today is Unizin, and we've titled it The Road Ahead for Digital Education. You know, it was just about 2 years ago, maybe a little more than that, spring of 2012 and summer of 2012, and we had all sorts of craziness going on about digital education. MOOCs had hit the mainstream, and boards of trustees and regents were saying to presidents, and presidents were saying to provosts, and provosts were asking the faculty, and this was going around of what are we going to do around this notion of digital education? And so we started looking into that pretty heavily in 2012, and certainly massive open online courses, or MOOCs, were going to play an important role of that. But for many of us, we're based at residential institutions that have all sorts of graduate degrees, doctoral degrees, master's degrees, as well as those who are state-based institutions. A lot of pressure from taxpayers and the legislature saying, how is higher education going to become more efficient in a digital era? So as we started thinking about where this was going, one of the things that really struck us was that digital ecosystems are very much like infrastructure. And that is more like common gauge rails than differentiating features of a university. So I'm the CIO at Indiana University, and I'm also a professor of business in the Kelley School of Business. And my first administrative job in 2002 was appointed as Associate Dean for Teaching and Learning Information Technology. And in those days, we were really excited. I mean, this is not very long after the internet, about 5 years after the commercial internet takes hold. And we really were excited where this was going to go for math tutoring or even some distance education with that crazy stuff called ISDN video conferencing of the day. And, you know, as you play forward from about 2000 to today, roughly about 15 years of ed tech, which university would just stand out in your mind saying, man, the University of X, they have just transformed themselves. They are known around the world as the most fabulous place for education, digital education, experiences students have in the classroom, how they learn things. Which university pops to your mind just head and shoulders differentiated from their peers? If you're drawing a blank, you're paying attention, because that's the point. We've poured a ton of money into 15 years of this, whether it was open source learning management systems, Blackboard, Desire to Learn, Moodle, things coming out of the textbook publishing industry, whatever. We've all spent a decade plus cobbling together these local systems. And in many ways, they're undifferentiated. So what if your institution says, well, we've got LMS vendor A, and we've added video conferencing from company B, and we've connected to our library through interface C and D. And then at another university, it's P, Q, R, and Z. Do you notice our faculty move from one university to taking a job in another university, and they succeed as great teachers? And so as we start to move towards cloud scale, it's time to ask the question, is it really the right thing to keep cobbling these local ecosystems again together over and over because they don't differentiate us? So if you think about it with the metaphor of the common gauge rails, what if every train company had different spacings for their rails? They essentially all do the same thing, and we saw some of this certainly in Europe, particularly between some of the communist era countries and those of Western Europe, different rail spacings on trains and things. So what was the value in differentiating it? Really none at all. So if we start to think differently, what are the motivations for where Unizin is going as a consortium of universities? As we studied this through 2012 and into 2013, what really struck us is, if you look at industry after industry, where it has become increasingly digital, one of the things that you see is digital goes to scale. Look at newspapers, look at music, Look at industry after industry, and you see things go to scale, even textbooks. There used to be how many textbooks publishers out there? Now the market concentration, about 65% of it's concentrated in 3 firms, maybe even a little bit higher than that. So we observed that content, the stuff that you teach from, the software platforms, how students interact with it, and then what you can discern from analytics were 3 distinct pieces that were going to go to scale over time and going to be really part of our core mission. The second thing is we also learned that if we own things, we have a much better chance at controlling where they go if we have control. And then the third is it's hard to get it all right in one big bet. So you'd like to have a bit of a loosely coupled system. So I want to speak to that point number 2 first about being in control. I think we have an absolute perfect experiment, natural experiment, over the last 25 years or so. So when digital came to academic publishing, we wrote papers and they went off to a paper journal, and then those journals used to run through printing presses and get distributed. No big deal. There was the society of this or that ran each journal. But when journals started going increasingly digital, we lost control of them over time. Most of them have been bought up by various publishers and such, and so we now spend over $1 billion a year. Pause and get that number in your head. It's about $1.1 billion for the top 150 universities in the US, and by the way, our friends in Britain spend that much as well, in addition, to rent the right to read our own scholarship because we lost control of academic journals. Internet too, if you think when it started in 1997, 98, and if you also think about that time, what was 96, 97, that was the heyday of the dot-coms were really taking off. So why would we need to own and build our own network when there were all sorts of companies, MCI and Sprint and AT&T, and there's lots of networking companies out there. But by being able to control that ecosystem for research and education, that has played out really well for us. So here's the 3 areas. Content, which my good friend at James Hilton, the Dean of Libraries, says, this is the fodder that we use to teach with. Simulations, talks, audio, video, lecture materials. The middle piece, applications, is where we interact. And then third, the results are the outcomes. This is the traditional ecosystem for teaching and learning. Now, what happens when it goes digital? Good parts of it go out to the cloud. You add all sorts of things that you didn't have to deal with before. So we had this whole ecosystem of, we knew how to physically teach a class, walk into some of those dreaded rooms that Stacy Maroney showed you in the session beforehand. But now what happens when your students walk in and they need to connect to a thing here, and the simulation is from maybe a textbook company out there that has some auto grading in it, and you're really worried about retention, and so you've got all sorts of tools trying to measure attendance at class and the early warning indicators. In a digital ecosystem, things get substantially more complicated. So when we set out to create Unizin, we have it organized around 6 key principles. The first and the most important is the organizing metaphor for Unizin is very much like Internet 2. Internet 2 was founded by 34 universities in the day that put up capital to build a national backbone, and then it was built with doors wide open, as you know. Now, Shell made the comment, I think 260, 270 members of Internet 2. So we're hoping that Unizin is beginning to venture, building out that infrastructure, university owned and directed, that we can scale out over time. So for universities making this decision, whether they want to become a member and investor of Unizin, the key thing is this is a strategic decision. It is a direction you're going. It's not a decision like, well, you know what, we're going to run on the Internet 2 network this week, but you know what, next week we may flip to a different company, and I don't know, next month we may do something else. This is a very important direction that we're going in. Second was control mattered, and if you control something, you have a lot more ability to steer its evolution over time. There was nothing wrong with the journals going out to academic publishers, commercial publishers, because they helped to build scale in this. But now we find that the price that we have to pay to buy our research back is very unfavorable, and we have no control over that system right now. Number 3 was focus on a loosely coupled system. We could have ran a big RFP and said it's going to be one big company and they take all of it to manage for us, or we're going to write everything from scratch so it's all open source and it's all ours. And we decided that neither of those is right. Unizin is a cloud scale operator that will bolt things together and write software where it needs to. We want to take advantage of scale because at Indiana University we're about 110,000 students across 8 campuses. But that's still not enough for the scale that we need in terms of managing content and in terms of analytics. I love Harper's comment in the previous session about he was more interested in big questions that yield big answers than big data. And I think that's a really good point for us as we head into this further. We think there's an opportunity as we go to digital. It's not about solving a problem for the island of Indiana University, and then the island of the University of Florida, and then the island of the University of Michigan. It's about learning how to thrive in a digital ecosystem together. And finally, you see, we're trying to synchronize our capital investment. The creation of Internet 2 was those universities coming together and saying, we all want to solve our high-performance networking needs by coming together at this year, at this time, to create this national network. Because it would be very easy, and we have this tendency in higher ed, where we lead and lag each other by about 1 to 2 years in what our interest is. Rice University is all about something in 1 year, and Indiana not so much. Then Indiana gets to the point we're all about it, and Rice says, yeah, we'd love to do that, but they've already committed and gone another direction. And so if we don't learn how to synchronize our investments, it's hard to get to any point of scale. So this is Unizin. Unizin is a cloud scale consortium owned by higher education. We didn't go out and create a new 501c3 and start another organization. It is administratively homed at Internet 2. They're doing our banking and billing and accounting services. Unizin has its own staff and is accountable to its members. Now, just like Internet 2 didn't roll up their investment and grab a shovel and start digging a ditch across the nation to lay fiber, Internet 2 went and bought an IRU on fiber, and it didn't invent the router. It bought routers. I think Cisco might have won the first round, if I recall correctly, and then put a professional staff to sew them together. That's what Unizin is doing. And you notice that our 2 key phrases here at the top are, if faculty are going to use this thing, we need to make it easy and we need to make it useful. So right now, if you're a professor and you're teaching a MOOC with any of the major platforms that are out there, all of them are geared for what MOOCs do well, but they're not geared for if you want to support residential education. If you also have classes that are residential, or if you have an online degree. So at Indiana University, the business school started Kelly Direct, an online MBA in 1999. #1 ranked MBA this year online, I might add, with a shameless local plug. But part of the reason that succeeded was we made it the same for what we were doing in the residential MBA classroom and what we did in the online MBA classroom. Same faculty, a lot of the same technology set. So Unizin, rather than trying to be a platform for just this other thing, we want it to be the platform you would use for residential education, for online degree programs, maybe for programs for continuing professional ed, executive education, things that you might sell to your alumni for $19.95 for something they want to learn the history of 18th century music or something, and also for MOOCs. Our founding members were Colorado State University, the University of Michigan, the University of Florida, and Indiana University. And you might say, how in heaven's name did that group all come together? Well, there was a long conversation over about 9 months to a year as we were getting closer to ready to move on this, and that was the 4 that were ready to move right away. We've now been joined by the University of Minnesota, the University of Wisconsin, Oregon State University, and I thought I would take one of those question marks off by today, but their lawyers are still helping. And as soon as they finish helping, we will have those documents signed, and we'll have 2 more big announcements to add to the bottom. And there's probably about a dozen more institutions out there that are in early stages of this conversation. So what's the roadmap? Where does Unizin go? And now that we officially launched it in June, when does it start providing services? And the answer to that was fantastic. We announced it in June, and in July, it was providing services to campuses. And you'll see how we were able to do that. So the first piece was the learning management system. We chose Canvas by a company called Instructure. We like that it is an open source learning management system, that if we got into a difficult situation with this company down the road, we would have an alternative if we had to stand it up and run it ourselves. But if you're standing up to run a mission-critical learning management system, there's a lot of cost to doing that, having redundancy, patching it, improving it. So we are happy to partner with Canvas, and we contracted with them, and they're running it in their cloud infrastructure. That's off to a really great start. So that allowed Unizin to have relevance day one, the first day it was turned on. Now, some would have, I want to pause here for a second, because some might say, well, wait a minute, you know, my campus, we use X, or we use Y, or we use B, and they're all great learning management systems. You know, some's a little prettier on this thing, and some's a little prettier on that thing. But one of the points is, if we're going to enable some degree of interinstitutional work, and to make it easy amongst our faculty, do we want train rails are 4.5 feet in one place, and then no, they go to 3 feet in another place, no, they go to 5.5 feet wide in another place? If it's infrastructure, it's infrastructure. And just like Internet 2 started, and it had Cisco routers, if I'm correct, from the first day, as I recall, around the 5-year refresh of those routers, was it Juniper? I think the refresh some of you here may know. And so parts of Unizin may be changed out over time, but Canvas is the one that we started with, and we're off to a great start in relationship with them. So some people think that Unizin is all about the learning management system. It's not at all. The second piece that we're very concerned about is content sources. Because if we don't learn how to create and manage and license content together, then we're going to find ourselves in an economic disadvantage of how we buy it back. So we started off talking about content, saying, well, we need to have a big digital bucket. We're going to have a cloud scale bucket, and the Indiana people can check their stuff in, and they can manage the rights and permission. And then the Wisconsin people can check their stuff in, and they can say if they want to share it or they don't want to share it. But fortunately, we got good counsel from some of our librarian colleagues and others, and they said, you know, first off, don't say bucket. Please don't say bucket. Okay, so we stopped saying that, except I just had to say that here. Instead, what we want to think about is a relay. You see that word there, the Unizin relay service? So we've announced our first 2 content systems. One is from Blackboard, their Explore product, and the second is from Canvas, called Canvas Commons from Instructure. But if you can read the little spot there on the screen, you'll notice the Hathi Trust, the little elephant symbol. That's our digital library. We have 13 million digitized volumes in it. There's a whole world of open educational resources out there as we try to take down the cost of educational materials. There's been a lot of great funding from the Gates Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation into open educational resources. And so we want to make it easy for our faculty to discover and find content that's available to them. Or if, let's just say it's Professor Brad, and I'm teaching one of my best lectures that I've ever given, and I record it, and I have some materials around it, I could make it freely and openly shareable to anyone in the world. Or I may say, no, this is really good. I'm just going to share this inside the Kelley School of Business. Or I may say, I'm going to share it just with me and my 2 former doctoral students who are at Florida or UNC Chapel Hill. Empowering the faculty to retain the rights of their content is really a big thing. Right now, with a lot of what's going on in the MOOC space, faculty are signing that over in many cases. And that's starting to raise a lot of appropriate concern. We do expect an e-commerce piece to be added here. So if there's a great chapter from a Pearson book or there's a simulation from McGraw-Hill, rather than licensing at a retail level where a student goes and pays $69.95 or $129 through an online ordering site or something, could we license it at a better deal using the aggregate buying power of Unizin? And we know we can. We've already done that at IU just with our e-text program. Also faculty, if you'll think about the model right now, a lot of faculty, to produce a textbook, they have to go outside of the academy. They can't do it internally in any way. And so the whole economics of this are very, very distorted. What if faculty were able to self-publish some of their materials, and if they were of interest to others in Unizin, they might be purchased back at a very, very modest but valuable rate? I could say that maybe I only have one sensible lecture and set of materials in my whole academic career, and for it, I just want $4.95 for it. And that might be better than other pricing that's available for comparable materials. I can see some of you out there thinking how vastly overpriced that would be. The other side of it, building out for fall of 2015, we're on content right now that's the spring of 15, and that is the analytics tools. We are starting to learn a lot about really the science of learning. And that is, what happens when you do A/B experiments like you see casinos do all the time? If students encounter a sequence of materials one way, what's their performance? What if you change the sequence and they study and encounter it another way? Faculty are starting to learn that it really matters. Right now, a lot of faculty, as we teach in classrooms, we have no idea what's really very effective from a technique perspective. But if we're able to start aggregating some of that, not only within our own schools or campuses, but across, and very important, control the policies around this, then we have, as one School of Education professor said to me, as she just had that look on her face, it's like, then we would have real learning science to start actually being able to draw very good conclusions. Not just a few of our star faculty who actually take on a learning analytics piece, but enabling more of our faculty to have better information about what they're doing and getting better at the practice of education. So that is Unizin. That is the road ahead. As you see, we have 7 members in right now, 2 more coming, I think, very, very soon. We kicked off this summer. We've hired our CEO. We have job positions posted, hiring a number of others. A chief technology architect, a learning technologies architect, an analytics architect are being hired right now. Our CEO is Amin Kazi. We recruited him from KPMG. We're very much running this like a agile startup of run fast and deliver services quickly. And we're very excited that this gives colleges and universities a greater means to control the digital education ecosystem. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that may come from the audience, and what else can I fill in for you as we go? Here.
I'm really excited about this. I'm from Michigan, so obviously. But in my role, I'm also an Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs, and so peer review is extremely important to our faculty, and how can they use this ecosystem to help capture the data that they can use when they go up for promotion. I'll leave it at that.
Well, absolutely. It's very important. Having gone through that promotion and tenure process myself, both steps of it, I understand the pain of the entire ordeal that is involved with it. I think anything that we do that helps document and quantify excellence in education the way we've often understood somewhat the metrics around excellence in research is going to be a big help. Right now, as you know, we can have classroom observation by peers, we can have maybe some publication around education and such, but that often doesn't get to the heart of, you know, Professor Sue. She is an outstanding teacher. Her students learn, and she's on a trajectory to become a better and better teacher over time. So I do think that the analytics side of this offers the potential to start doing more of that, but we've got a lot of work to do to enable that behavior amongst the faculty. You've got the professor there at Michigan who's doing so much on analytics. I can't recall his name.
Barry Fishman?
I'm sorry?
You're thinking Barry Fishman, maybe?
No, that's not the gentleman I'm thinking of. I'm sorry, I'm going blank at the moment, but I know the provost has put some money in his work, and even the CIC, the Big Ten universities plus the University of Chicago, are doing some joint investment around that. And I think for legitimacy in promotion and tenure, we have to develop the practice that is multi-institutional so that it has more stature than if we just said, oh, in the School of Information at Michigan, if you do these two things, they count. Well, that's probably good, but wouldn't it be great if they also counted at, you know, Penn State or Ohio or Indiana? But we have to work on legitimizing this. We've just essentially got laying the train rails now, not so much describing all the train cars and whether you want first or second class or you get a meal with that ride. What else question about Unizin can I share with you? Steve?
Brad, it seems that one of the positive aspects here is just like Internet 2 was able to make network data available to the research community, even beyond just the basic analytics component, there is a gold mine here for the educational scientists and potentially a funding source with NSF. Do you see how well poised is Unizin to work with that community and to go after perhaps other sources of funding?
Yeah, the question, make sure that the remote audience could hear it, is that this platform running across institutions with content, the interactions, and then the analytics could be a gold mine of data for research data. We think that's hugely important. Right now, some of the efforts out there, you know, a lot of cloud things, they're often trying to figure out how to monetize data. So you notice you get a new user agreement every so often where you give up more and more and more and more of your rights every time you seem to work with some firm out there. This puts the universities squarely in control of policy around analytics, and we think that is huge. So research done on these data sets, first it would be policy compliant, and the second, it would be IRB, as you know, Institutional Review Board. We can ensure that we're following good research protocols, proper notification, things such as that. The volume and the kinds of questions that we can ask also have another branch, and that is what we can learn from de-identified data in aggregate may be one thing, but what about the kinds of data that or questions and answers that we may get when it is it is identified student data? And we can do that within policy, within FERPA, within IRB rules. Now, I don't want to go too far out on a ledge here, but some registrars and others have talked, they believe we can do cross-institutional identified studies at some point within proper controls. Because what's interesting is often not only the things that you would know from the learning management system and interactions, but what if you knew that student transferred in with a 2-year degree when they walked onto, say, the University of Utah campus versus they started as a first-year, first-semester student at the University of Utah. That might give you a little bit different insight about their preparation and readiness. What if you knew it was a student who had changed majors 7 times versus a student who started as a direct admit into the business school or the biology program? We think those kinds of data, again, properly controlled, can give us a lot more insight rather than just where people are doing most of their research right now is in pretty small, isolated puddles of data. So we're all about that. Yes, sir.
It looks really exciting. My questions are about scale. So on the one hand, there could be a question of when do you think you might reach critical mass, or have you reached it already? And the other is there a scale that would be too big, or is it just an open door for everyone?
Yeah, the question is about scale. What's the right scale to hit critical mass? And is there a point that it gets too big or not? I'll take the second question first. And that is, we believe most of these technologies, as you write them for cloud scale or you contract with various pieces that are cloud scale, a bit like Reed was talking about, that this is a very elastic. Google has demonstrated elasticity as well as others. Canvas is a very elastic learning management system, the way it's been written right now. So I'm not so worried about that side of it. I think that's just part of how the world is going to work. We've got big fat pipes now with Internet 2. Many of the research universities connected at 100 gig. Lots of, through the regional networks, 10 or 40 gig. So that doesn't concern me so much. What is the right scale for this? I think that's a far more interesting question. To first order, I think having lots of the research universities involved early on. We get to 2025, we've been saying AAU-ish members, not all members of the AAU, but kind of large institutions in terms of their role. We think that rather than each of us solving these problems one at a time, before we did this, the scale option for Indiana University was Indiana University, or going to a commercial provider where we didn't have any of the things that I just described to you in terms of rights. So if it was just us in Michigan, we would have been better off than before. But now add in Florida, add in the list of institutions that you see, and it just gets better and better. So, and from a financial modeling perspective, this thing runs fine. Literally 10 to 20, it runs fine. So everything financially is gravy beyond that. I do think that you could see a path to 50 to 100 over a few short years, and the reason I say that is we're all solving the same problem. We're all solving the same problem, and I don't think that the other options that I see out there right now afford the level of control in the hands of the academy that Unizin provides, and that's been really key to our success. Now, some of you know how we're capitalizing this is it's $1 million buy-in to be a Unizin founder. That's over 3 years, and you may go, wow, whoa, sticker shock. If you pause and think about what you would be spending to really build a solid content service and to build an analytics service on your campus that would be sustainable and integrate and extensible over time, if you really put a pencil to that, so if it's $350 a year, basically for $333 a year, from Indiana for the first 3 years, I can get to $300,000 pretty fast at IU, just spending on a few things that really don't have the run room that this thing has in it. In time, the financial model may look different as it gets much larger, but right now, to capitalize it and build it, that's the model that makes sense, and it's full. If you join today, you're a founder. Indiana's a founder. Those 2 question marks that we'll reveal soon, they're founders. And we've often long believed in consortia and the golden rule, and that is you bring the gold, you make the rules. And so that's why investors are coming forward, is they like the idea of shaping the digital education ecosystem. Maybe time for one more question, then I think we're about there. Anything else? Okay, I'll hang around for a moment if anybody would like to know more. Thank you for coming, and we'll hope to see you as a Unizin member someday. Thank you.